What is art?
Art is...
Art is history.
What is art? That's a good question.
This is Art Uncovered.
Art is our collective cultural history.
A weekly podcast that brings you interviews with an eclectic mix of artists and creators.
Art is...
Disappointing your parents.
I'm your host, Kimberly.
Navigating the medical system as extensively as I have has deeply informed my work. I think that the immersion in wellness communities is something that happens so often to particularly women who are being ignored by traditional Western medicine. I think that that can be a fantastic thing. I think that when we experience self-care, though, through the primary mode of consumerism, I think that's when it becomes less radical and more problematic, and also even more dangerous.
Thanks for tuning in, everyone. That was the voice of my guest this week, Ash Hagerstrand, a Brooklyn-based artist whose work explores their experience of navigating medical spaces as a femme person with disabilities. Over the course of the conversation, we talk about Ash's relationship to online wellness communities and their work in sculpture and digital art. Stay with us. Welcome back, listeners. Thanks again for tuning in to this week's episode of Art Uncovered. This week, I am so excited to be here with Brooklyn-based artist Ash Hagerstrand. Ash, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, super happy to be here.
So I'd love to start by talking about your work. While looking at your work, I saw an interesting reference to, and I put quotes around this work, so I don't love it, but I think it does a good job of describing your work, dismembered body parts. There's
Yes.
a lot of like floating hands and feet that aren't attached to other limbs. So let's start there. What does this reference come from?
Yes, a big starting point for this project was Donna Haraway's Cyborg Manifesto. Like so many projects have to do with digital work, but the cyborg, what I liked about it is I feel like we're all sort of augmented in a way. We're all always interfacing with technology more and more now that sort of creates the cyborg being, and what she was proposing was sort of this blending of human machine, natural and like constructed culture as a way to transcend binaries enforced by oppressive systems. And then she also, in the same essay, proposes that disabled folks are, also I'm a disabled person, so I should mention that.
Okay.
So a lot of references to disability in my work. She proposes that disabled people sort of have this natural predisposition to being cyborgian, but she doesn't explore the idea too much, but it was something that I was definitely interested in when I read it. I feel like disabled people sort of have this complicated relationship with technology, especially when it augments the body.
Before we go on, I just want to clarify a couple of terms that you use there for listeners who might not know. So cyborgian, can you explain what this is?
Yeah, so it's sort of like the human body. It's a creature that's like a sort of human body that's been interwoven with technology, augmented with technology in a way that's like totally transcended humanity or organic living. Sort of like if your brain is uploaded into the cloud, or one day if we're all mechanical body parts, mostly except for our brains, and this sort of blending of how we've become technological, how we evolved with technology, plus how technology evolves us, sort of thing.
Do you
And
think this exists in today's world yet, or is it
definitely.
Yeah. In what ways?
I think that, I mean, for one, we're constantly attached to our phones. I know that we don't usually think of that as augmenting our bodies, but the fact that I can't walk around New York without my phone in my hand, sort of constantly connected to the internet. More extreme versions of this is maybe like the idea of implanting chips in brains, which I know Tesla is working on,
It's fucking terrifying.
which is very interesting.
Yeah.
And then, just in everyday, like a lot of disabled people were augmented by technology. We're connected to like things that keep us alive, machines that keep us alive. And then even though we don't think of like a wheelchair or mechanical body part as sort of the ideal way in which people are, quote unquote, the ideal way in which technology has sort of pushed our wellness culture. I think that it's like a primary way that we sort of exist as
Yeah.
cyborg creatures, if that
Mm.
makes sense.
Yeah, wonderfully said. And then you also mentioned online wellness community. I'm wondering if, yeah, you could explain this community, maybe your involvement with it.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think so as a teenager I was like constantly sick and missing school and stuck in the house a lot. And so I have like a lot of nostalgic memories of being very entrenched in online wellness communities during that time, already trying to figure out like, oh, I have stomach issues. How can I detox that? I feel like, especially when I was growing up, that was so prevalent. I mean, it still is. Like fitness influencers are a huge thing. So I would move in and out of these like micro online wellness communities, in search of like fixing myself, I guess. Which was,
Mm.
which is always, I'm also from California. I think that that feeds into it a lot, where there's a very specific wellness culture in California that like goes
Oh,
back to the 1800s. Even the architecture in California has a lot to do with wellness culture. If you go to Southern
oh, interesting. How
California,
so?
yeah, so if you go to Southern California, you'll notice that a lot of the houses and architecture are very window heavy, and it's because during the development period of those in like the 1970s, there was this huge movement about sunlight sort of helping the body,
Hmm.
especially bodies that struggle with chronic illness. And then California also has this huge history with sanitariums, sending people places to sort of regain their wellness because the air
Yeah.
is dry, because there's sun, because we're near the water. So you can find a lot of those in California. I think it's really interesting, and I think that that's also, we have like an awful history with eugenics. I don't know if you know much
Mm.
about the Californian.
No, I don't.
So California had one of the biggest eugenics programs in the United States, specifically targeting disabled people and then people of color. Um, so much so that it sort of inspired Germany when they
Oh my
were,
gosh.
yeah, I know. Uh, it's a very like
Wow.
not well-known thing about California, because you don't think of California like that, but I think that
Mhm.
there's definitely an undercurrent of that unavoidably within the way wellness culture works in California.
So I cut you off in order to ask you those follow-up questions, but I think you were starting to go into your sculptures and maybe how these ideas kind of, manifest in your artwork.
Yeah, I sort of think about my sculptural body parts, which they're all 3D printed. Um, and I like to think of them
Mm.
actually as like reanimated digital corpses. So you calling them dismembered body parts was actually perfect.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, it was really nice. I saw that and I was like, yes, it comes across. I'm very interested in how we translate our bodies from the interweb to and from the interweb, and what glitches sort of manifest when we like do that transmutation, born digital art to physical space. I'm drawing a lot from Legacy Russell's glitch feminism, of course. Within glitch feminism, glitch is celebrated as like this vehicle of refusal and a strategy for non-performance. Um,
Mhm.
and the generative function of malfunction acts as a vehicle for empowerment, which I think is very applicable to disability rights. Um, and if you look, I know that you can't see them obviously if you're listening to podcast
Mhm.
form, but if you're, and also I don't think my camera is going to be good enough to pick it up, but if you look at the pieces up close in person, um, at first they look like sculptural, maybe they could have been cast, but you get closer and you can see the lines of the 3D printing, and then
Mhm.
also like these weird dots and digital glitches, or like where the machine sort of messed up and the translation between digital and physical wasn't quite correct,
Ah,
which I really enjoy about them.
I'd like to do a screen share here. I'm actually on your Instagram page, but maybe it's best to go to your website.
Instagram probably has more up-to-date stuff.
Okay, cool,
I
cool.
need to update my website so bad.
Yeah, you and me both. Okay, let me do a screen share here with share. Okay, can you see my screen?
Hmm.
Okay, excellent. So I'll just click on the first one here. Was this in what space is this one currently in?
Yeah, so this was shown at A Space. They're a newer gallery in Brooklyn. They're fantastic, fantastic, especially for new media artists. I would
Oh,
definitely
cool.
recommend everybody check them out. Who's posting about me though is so mad, who I do like Pride Month
Awesome.
events with, which is really nice. Um, but yeah, it definitely referencing shrine making. I think that ritual is really important to how we think about wellness. And I'm definitely interested in that ritual. I think there's like a radical element to ritual care that's very soothing.
Mm.
So I definitely think of my work almost as also altar making. And this one
Oh,
is called Veronica's Veil. I don't know if you know much about like Christian art or anything like that.
I should. I went to Catholic school my whole life, but I don't know.
Okay, it's okay. This is kind of a niche one. It's like at some point during the Stations of the Cross, Jesus he stumbles and Veronica like wipes his hands her veil to wipe his face and then
Yes,
his
yes, yes,
face
yes, yes.
yeah,
Okay, okay,
yeah, yeah,
okay.
magically transmuted onto the like veil that she's holding. So
Yes, that's, oh my gosh, that's right. What an interesting reference here. Very
yeah, so
cool.
thinking a lot about like skincare and the fabric is so hard to photograph, but it is like a latex that's skin toned, looks like skin. And people are always like, "Oh wow, that looks so much more like skin in person." I've yet to
Mm,
photograph it correctly.
mm, mm.
Um, and thinking about like faces, wiping the I think what's so interesting about that story not only is like the miracle of the transmutation of the face or but really the active care of wiping a face, I guess.
Mm.
Especially a face that's like struggling and in pain and how we sort of are so obsessed with skincare in a way that can also act as like a ritual to calm ourselves
Mm.
after a long day, if that makes sense.
Mm. Yeah, one other theme that I noticed in your work is it seems like a lot of the references to body parts are feminine in nature. Is this a true observation?
I think that that is such like an interesting question for me because it's something that I think about a lot.
Mm.
On one hand, I feel like within the digital realm, we have like this power to curate and shape our identities, which is really powerful to reflect like sort of our innermost thoughts and our desires. However, I think that the internet is also a place uh, that's become very algorithm driven and sort of an echo chamber for our own biases and beliefs. I'm always interested in the ways that oppression or bias can be fed into our digital landscape. I think that a lot of femme experience online has a lot of constant personal optimization woven into the undertone of what we're consuming. Constant reminders to like tone, moisturize, cleanse, so on. However, I have been like seeing it more and more in mass spaces as well now,
Mhm.
surrounding things like mogging or like the popularization of like incel language or biohacking. I think that's something
Well, I don't know
insidious.
any of those words.
Oh my gosh. I just felt very chronically online.
No. So what was the first one? Mogging?
Yeah, mogging is like
What is this?
so it comes from like this community online that's oh my God, I'm gonna describe this so poorly. They're really
Let-
obsessed with like looks maxing. I don't know if you know what
Okay.
looks maxing is. It's mostly like a mask. I've found that it's mostly like sort of a mask community. So they're very obsessed with like shaping their jawlines to be very strong or like
Mm.
sort of that very chiseled, almost handsome Squidward sort of look to them. And mogging is when you're like next to someone doing looking more attractive, basically, like showing them off by looking more attractive in a way. Also, like a
Wow.
lot of times there's like tongue exercises where you have to hold your tongue in a certain way to make your jawline look really nice.
Oh my
So
gosh.
like
That sounds so
mogging memes are
exhausting.
always like heavily filtered men like
Oh my God.
looking very attractive.
Wow.
Attractive.
Wow. Wow. Wow.
But
And
something that I think is
what
kind
is
of
your like your perception or take of um you know It's wild to me that there's this like language that exists that have never heard of. Like, what is your, yeah, I guess, do you have a reaction to this?
Yeah, I think that what I find insidious about like femme experience, on the other hand, is that the ideas of optimizing ourselves into these fittest, cleaner, prettiest version of us, it's so common that it's unremarkable. I feel like people always comment really heavily on incel culture or the idea of looks maxing, but femme folks have been like look maxing and biohacking for decades, and it's just sort of expected of us, and it's not
Mm.
even notable. So
Mm.
I find that very interesting.
So one of the questions that I had planned for you was, so I noticed when looking in your work, you had references to women in medical spaces. Yeah, I'm wondering if you could kind of elaborate on this for us.
Yeah, I like never stop talking about it, so I was so excited to answer this question.
Perfect.
I think that a lot of it springs from my own experience as like a femme presenting person navigating medical spaces, um,
Mm.
which is always difficult. But I think that book that really radicalized me on the subject, which I recommend everyone read, is Doing Harm by Maya Dusenberry. And then just quote, I have like a long quote from that book. I'm so sorry. I'm gonna read
Yeah,
it
go
because
for it.
I'm
Please, please, please. The mic's yours.
very good. Women wait 65 minutes to men's 49 before getting treatment for abdominal pain in the emergency room. Young women are 7 times more likely to be sent home from the hospital in the middle of having a heart attack. Women face long delays, often years long, to get diagnosed, even with diseases that are quite common in women. And they experience longer diagnostic delays in comparison to men for nearly everything, from brain tumors to rare genetic disorders. Whenever you hear a condition described as quote unquote contested, the odds are good that the contest is between, on one hand, the mostly women patients who believe their condition to be organic, and on the other hand, a medical establishment that assumes their medically unexplained symptoms are all in their heads.
That's awful.
Yeah. So there's this, I feel like there's this huge, and the way it feeds back into my work, I feel like there's this huge industry that sort of targets people like me, and it understands that what if Western medicine often fails us. And then this sort of I feel like also the self-care obsession speaks to the radical comfort of ritual in the face of uncertainty provided by often sexist and racist medical system, because the stats for white women are bad, but the stats for women of color are even worse.
Mm.
Especially surrounding childbirth, like the
Yeah.
child care birth process for women of color is like, I don't want to pull a fake stat out of my head, but it's
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
significantly
mm-hmm,
worse.
mm-hmm,
You're
mm-hmm.
much more likely to die during childbirth as a woman in color in the United States, which
Mm.
is appalling, shouldn't be happening. And a lot of that is surrounding like these medical myths around Black women not feeling pain. And the disbelief of their pain can also often lead to like complications going untreated.
Mm. Have you
Um,
experienced any of this mistreatment in your life?
oh yeah. Um, I think that I mean this is an average too. What I'm about to say is like an average. I have lupus. I have moderate to severe lupus, which just means that it's affecting more than one organ system in me, along with a dozen other disorders, but
Mm.
lupus is my big main one. It took me, lupus is extremely common in women. I will just preface it with that.
Ah.
It took me 5 to 6 years to get diagnosed, even though I was having pretty obvious symptoms. Um, I was misdiagnosed at one point with a functional neurological disorder, which women are like 3 or 4 times likely to get diagnosed with, and it's a very nice way of saying that you have
Oh
hysteria.
my gosh. Oh my gosh. How did you find like was it like one doctor that just like
I
was
went to about 5 doctors before I finally got diagnosed,
yeah,
and
wow,
across
wow.
like many, many states. So part of the thing that complicated it, of course, was I was young. Uh, lupus often starts manifesting in people's late teens to early 20s. Mine started
Okay.
manifesting when I was 23. So I was in college, and so I was going back and forth between the East Coast and the West Coast, and then I moved
Mm,
to the Midwest, and I didn't get diagnosed until I moved to New York City.
wow. Does your personal experience make it into your work?
Oh, I think that it informs like so much of my work.
Mm-hmm,
I
mm-hmm.
feel like the disbelief in my condition taking so long to get diagnosed. Like even at one point I came in with neurological symptoms because my lupus affects my central nervous system. I came to the hospital with severe neurological symptoms happening, and they tested me for drugs without my consent, a
Oh
full
my
drug
God.
panel. So, I've got a lot of horror stories,
It-
but I think that sort of navigating the medical system as extensively as I have has deeply informed my work.
mhm,
I
mhm,
think that also like the immersion in wellness communities is something that happens so often to particularly women who are being ignored by the traditional Western medicine
mhm,
world. I think that that can be a fantastic thing. I think that self-care can be radical. I think that when we experience self-care though through the primary mode of consumerism, I think that's when it becomes less radical
mhm,
and more problematic, and also even more dangerous, if that
mhm.
makes sense.
It sounds like you advocated pretty hard for yourself by going to different doctors, and I don't know if you had like an innate belief that what they were telling you is wrong. But do you have any suggestions for other women who might be going through something similar?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much that you have to navigate within the medical system as a person who's femme. I think that the number one thing is learning to advocate for yourself, which I
Mhm,
know can be very difficult because you go to a doctor, and especially if you don't have a lot of experience with the medical system, it's sort of like the beginning of your journey, and you've always been taught to see them as like the end all be all of what's
mhm.
going on, even to the point where you start to discredit your own experience, like your own lived
Yeah,
experience.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
There were so many times where I was just like, am I just crazy? But I think that, yeah, learning to advocate for yourself, don't be afraid to get a second opinion,
Mhm,
especially even if diagnostic like I've gotten millions of blood tests before my blood test came back in such a way that lupus was indicated, um, in addition to my symptoms, which were very classically lupus. I think that we also this is gonna go into a weird rant about like cameras and diagnostic tools and stuff. Um,
Interesting, 'cause that's connected
but
to your work.
yeah, so
Mhm, yeah.
I think I'm interested a lot in how we sort of see diagnostic tools and diagnostic imaging as like a end all be all
Mhm,
over experience, but in reality it's only a capture, a little tiny sliver in a moment of time, and a million things can be affecting that. Um, and I think that there's a lot of like me and Fran like in Francis's show, there's a much more articulated discussion on this, but I'm interested in the idea of like proof making, in that like a lot of my work sort in the beginning especially was born out of me trying to like in a way document my symptoms so that they would be real,
mhm,
like
mhm, mhm,
like getting a longer term capture of what I was experiencing. And I think that so much of what I was experiencing was also online because like I was Googling my symptoms,
right,
and
right.
I actually thought I had lupus, I think 4 years before I finally got diagnosed. Not that I kept pushing for a lupus diagnosis. There was a million other things it could have been because lupus is quite wide reaching. But I was like, I think it's lupus, but everyone's telling me it's not. And then finally, 5 years later, my tests came back in such a way
Wow,
where, oh yeah, it is.
wow. Yeah, at the beginning of our talk, I mentioned that your work seems to exist in multiple spaces, right? We have like the gallery space where your sculptures exist, but you also have a heavy like online facet to your practice. I'm curious if maybe you could talk a bit about those differing spaces. Like, is there like what do you think you get from showing in a gallery space that you don't get from online, and vice versa?
Yeah, I think it's really cool that you noticed that because it's something I sort of embarked on like a year ago. I find that there's like this naturally engrossing experience, like naturally immersive experience about encountering work on the internet, So when you encounter artwork within the context of the internet, you are sort of like primed to be immersed in the image or video or the artwork.
Hmm.
But something I've really struggled with showing in gallery spaces is sort of losing that natural immersion when the work is translated to in real life. So a lot of my sculptural work was actually born out of that sort of frustration. I feel like I haven't found a way for sculptures to live online though, and being as immersive as I like. Um, so there's this constant push and pull that I'm interested in and struggling with between digital art, digital born art, and then sort of the physical world. I don't think I have a preference for either, but I do love that sort of tension.
Which did you start with? Did you start with sculpture or digital work?
Digital art, definitely. I feel like, well, I mean, technically I was a photographer first. I majored in photography, and something that I struggled a lot with in photography is, especially film photography, is sort of this non-control, I guess. I love things to be extremely controlled by me. It's part of my therapeutic process with art, I think.
Yeah.
Um, and so the reason I got into collage and then sort of digital art was it was a way for me to completely construct the reality almost, in a way that I couldn't do with photographs, or at least I couldn't do like satisfactorily with photographs. Um, I mean, also I'm just like a person who's very interested in like digital ideas as well, but I think that yeah, that starting that way was really cool. And then sculpture sort of grew as a natural way to progress it and bring it into a more in-person space, um, especially gallery spaces. I feel like when you encounter like a work on a TV screen in a gallery, it's not nearly as like immersive as if you were like looking at it on Instagram,
Yeah, yeah,
or
yeah,
a
yeah.
website, if that makes sense.
Did you feel pressured by the art world to make work that can be shown in a physical space?
Not really. I feel like I don't make work that's necessarily easy to show in the art world. I don't think the sculptures have helped too much with how easy it is to show. I think that it wasn't necessarily the art world, but more the viewer, if that makes sense. There's an experience I want the viewer to have, and when it's in person, it lost that experience. And adding the sculptural works sort of played into that tension both conceptually and visually.
Oh, do you mean like if you only exhibited digital work without the sculptural element?
Yes.
So just on a
Yeah.
screen. I see, I see, I see. Is it mostly screen based or are there projections also?
I used to be a projection person. Now you're gonna get like a bunch of stuff about me working in galleries. So I work in galleries fairly regularly. I'm currently the operations director at Apex Art for the next 3 days before I transition into another role. But I have a lot of gallery install experience, and the way I wanted to work with projectors involved projection mapping, which is something you have to travel for basically, because you can't
Yeah,
expect a gallery attendant to projection map your work,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
unless
yeah.
they just happen to be like a fantastic, technically savvy gallery attendant. And I also, this is such a practical answer to your question.
No, practical's good.
Um, I also don't want to be that artist that, everybody dreads working with because their work is so fucking hard to set up. Excuse my language.
No, that's
Um,
great.
so I always make my work as easy, like I think a lot about how to make my work transportable, easy to set up.
That is so wildly thoughtful.
Um, I think that media artists get like a bad rap because, it's so often the
Yeah, yeah.
technology is malfunctioning. They're like people don't know how to set up their work. It can be hard, and I try to push against that a little bit. My work is very easy to set up. Um, I recently
That is
had
so sweet of you.
I recently had an install where I came in and the guy was like, "Oh, do you need any help setting up?" And I was like, "Absolutely not." It was actually for the Venus or Veronica's Veil piece. I literally like screwed 3 screws into the wall, hung my hands on it, put the TV against the thing, and had a
That's
media player
great.
ready to go. And it was
That's
like,
great.
he was like, wow, that was crazy easy.
That's excellent. I did want to ask you because I saw that you are the founder of, and let me get, it's like Chronically Online Gallery. Is that the right title?
Yep, that's it.
Okay. Okay, what is this? What is Chronically Online?
Yeah, so I haven't actually gotten to do Chronically Online for 2 years now
Mm,
because of my current position. It's a conflict of interest.
mhm,
But moving on to my new position, hopefully that I get to restart it up. Um, Chronically Online Gallery was sort of started in 2021 during the pandemic,
mhm.
when a lot of online gallery spaces were cropping up. And I was in an online gallery show where their online space was sort of so immersive that it looked real. I had like 20 people asking me if I was like for real showing in such a like large space with big work. Um,
Oh, wow.
and I sort of got the idea from there. Like, I think one of the biggest struggles, especially if you have a like a physical disability, is hanging work on the wall to get good documentation. I think that's a big barrier in the art world.
Hmm.
Um, and so I sort of had the idea to make a space that was very realistic and looked realistic enough that I could invite disabled and chronically ill artists in to have a digital show, but have documentation that was
It's
good
so
enough to like
brilliant.
fool a committee, if that makes sense. And that way they can get more opportunities. But it kind of became more
Wow.
than that in a really cool way. I sort of um, watched a community spring up around it, and I really enjoyed seeing everybody's career sort of go on from there. And I still follow a
Wow.
lot of those artists. So it's been really, it was really lovely, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. I want to see. So while I switch over to another screen share here, it like, did you use AI or something like this to create the quote unquote gallery space?
No, so there's, I'm gonna plug a website. It's
Yeah.
Kunstmatrix. They do these online gallery spaces. I'm sure they thrived during the pandemic. They could build you a 3D space and host gallery shows. You can get custom spaces. They also have templates. I was using a template at the time. I was looking into sort of,
Something
yeah,
like
there it is,
this. Yeah.
empty.
Yeah. Wow. So cool. It looks like it. Yeah. Amazing.
If you just edit it just right, it looks
Yeah.
real enough. Um,
Very exciting.
yeah, I don't know if I have any,
How long was it
only about a
been open
year
for?
before. If you click the link, I'm sure it's still up in some form. I still pay for it to be up, so
Enter virtual gallery. Here we go.
I think this would be the Francis Bukowski. They did a solo show with me. Francis is a very good online friend. Their work is amazing.
Awesome. Okay, enter exhibition here. Oh my God, this looks fantastic. Look at this.
Yeah,
Uh,
isn't that fun?
oh my gosh. Oh, and there's music also?
Yeah, Francis created a sound piece to go along with the.
Brilliant. Well, hopefully
Only the
you're.
windows look off, so I'm like always trying to not include the windows.
But you need the natural light. It's so great. Well, I hope your new position allows you to be able to to restart this. This is so wonderful. So my last question for you, do you have any upcoming shows or something like this that we could promote for you?
Yeah, I should be in Opulent Mobility this year. Opulent Mobility is sort of this online going thing. Laura Brody runs that. I've participated since 2021, and it's an annual thing.
Awesome.
Uh, it's disabled artists making work sort of celebrating disability instead of like
Hmm.
anything that's, I feel like a lot of work that gets shown from disabled artists often has like the sad overtone to it. So
Yeah,
something I
yeah.
really appreciated about Opulent Mobility is how celebratory it is.
Oh, it's wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, Ash, thank you so much for this conversation and for your work. You're a brilliant speaker. And
Oh, thank
yeah,
you.
I appreciate it. I appreciate your time and your work. And Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, listeners, that's all for today's episode. Be sure to tune in 2 weeks as I will be speaking with Abby Cheney, a Brooklyn-based artist whose textile-inspired sculptures were recently shown at a show titled Warp and Weft at Satellite Art Show. Hope to see y'all then. Have a safe week. Bye-bye.